Well, hi, this is Jason T. Ingram, and this is the continuation of a series that's going on for way too long called Christianity or Insanity. I am a self-identified post-Christian, and what I've noticed about being a former Christian is that occasionally I will meet born-again Christians. And I mentioned this a little bit about how they address folks that were formerly in the faith, and they see them as simply just always a Christian, but just not practicing it or backslidden or something like that. And it's really offensive to them, especially when I come in and I want to do their music, I want to eat their food, I want to hang out with them, but I don't want anything to do with their ideology and their code of ethics and that stuff. And so from their perspective, it probably feels like, let's say I'm this ex-girlfriend and this guy is just calling me up and saying, hi, I really miss your cooking and your fucking. I just want you for that. But I don't want to respect you or have a relationship with you or anything like that. I just want the goodies and then I'm going to be gone. And so I don't blame them for not really being willing to include me in their lives, and especially not having friends because they're really concerned about having the wrong influence. And I think that's kind of sad, because if people really are strong in their faith, it doesn't matter what kind of friends you have if it's not going to affect you. It's just that they're trying to create a worldview that needs a lot of explanation, that needs constant reinforcement. And it's either a mix of what people think are spiritual experiences, and I talked a little bit about that last time, about answered prayer, which is wonderful. It's just that in the context of a certain ideology, when people have answered prayer, whether it really is a miracle or not, really, if it is attributed to their deity or not, it will be in the context of their faith, and it'll solidify their faith. And another thing is just, being taught a lot. And in the 90s, when I became a Christian, it was all about collecting tapes, they said they're bookworms, and then there's, these guys that just listen to teachers and preachers all the time, and we called them tapeworms because we would subscribe to, the tape series of the month or of the week. And then what we end up happening is, especially when you watch a lot of Trinity broadcasting, which I've watched that on and off for years and years and years. In fact, it was kind of like my safety zone, that I would watch Joyce Meyer, once or twice a day, and Joel Osteen, and some of the folks that were maybe what you'd consider a little watered down compared to like John Hagee and some of the real intense ones, especially like Rod Parsley, who spoke at my Bible school graduation. I'm wearing my Bible school graduation shirt from 1999. Rod Parsley spoke there. I don't know why, but my mother came with her lesbian partner all the way to Oklahoma from Arizona. Don't ask me. I mean, I thought that was a really nice gesture, that even though, they just did not at all agree with, this Bible school that I went to, they went out there to see me. And Rod Parsley speaking against feminism. And, looking back, I was really kind of hoping that, my mother, especially her partner, which was like your epitome of the rural, rifle-owning handyman lesbian out in the country that you don't want to fuck with. She should have stood up and just been like, screw you, you fucking preacher, and blah, blah, blah. And, but they were actually pretty darn nice. And I've noticed this, though, with people, how they respond to fundies. Educated people really try not to argue with fundies, because we know that just fuels their faith. When we acknowledge them and recognize them, that gives them power. And they're always looking to be recognized, especially in the science community with a lot of creation science and stuff. So when we recognize them, it gives them power. When we persecute them, it also gives them power. When we give them any kind of attention, it gives them power. Which is very similar to how our administration is being run in our government too. You know, we have a president that seems to get power from positive and negative attention as well, and he uses that both to his advantage, and so it's very clever. And there is a huge synergistic thing that's going on with this power financial billionaire type thing, which has little or nothing to do with the Bible, with their moral standards, with their theology and stuff like that. It's just that they use each other. And so another form of crazy is that when you deal with folks that have a theology that's thousands of years old and a culture that's decades and decades old, and they're using a lot of modern tools in order to propagate this stuff, like social media, which is just huge. And people are marinated in social media when it comes to conservative politics and when it comes to faith, and especially a biblical ideology. But I do find it interesting how fundies, like fundamentalist Christians, use the secular right when it comes to all their freedom of, corporate stuff and freedom of religion. And a lot of times when they mean freedom of religion, they mean freedom of a conservative biblical worldview type religion, and to be able to be recognized. Or if they don't get recognized, then they'd be like, oh, we're persecuted and blah, 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 and that strengthens us. And so I find that really interesting, just because of how different the atmosphere is in the United States over the last, almost 3 years now. And I predict that we aren't going to swing back to the left wing anytime soon. And so I think the progressive educated community, really needs to understand the mind of the biblical ideology type person and what motivates them and how we can get along. Because I find myself actually getting along really well with conservatives, and ironically I seem to get along with them better than educated people. And I don't know why. I think it's just because I like to complain about liberals and we have that in common. And I do find that very interesting. And so one of the crazy things is trying to influence politics. And when we influence politics in one way or another, it really does give a lot of power to one particular way of thinking and way of living. And one of the things that Frank Zappa was quoted on a television interview back in the 1980s, and I reposted this on one of my, I did this really annoying series about Bible Christians and Trump and the synergy between that. And I had a clip from Frank Zappa where he was talking about what he called a fascist theocracy. And a theocracy is a form of government where supposedly they put God on top, and then there's somebody who hears from God and obeys God, and then everybody obeys that leader, kind of a thing. And we've had theocracies for thousands of years. In fact, that was really the main form of government for a lot of people, especially the Catholic Church influencing government. Of course, we all know about that for years and years. And then you got someone like Billy Graham, and I personally like Billy Graham. I think he was a really cool guy. And I think he was a great communicator, and he was a great bridge between government and church. And I think, there was a lot of influence there that I think, from my perspective now, wasn't very healthy. But I mean, he met with more living presidents than, you know, that were in office during that time than most people, especially in the church and outside of government. But that was one of our goals, was to influence government. And I remember there's one guy who I really like who was a worship leader. And we were hanging out one time and he said, my goal is world domination. And I think, well, at least he was honest about that, that the mentality is that the folks that interpret the Bible a certain way, and they happen to resonate with a lot of the same people that are on like Trinity Broadcasting. That's the kind of culture I'm talking about, is they essentially want to take over the world because they feel like they have a mandate. The Great Commission, preach the gospel to every creature, the whole world and all nations, teach all nations. And there's so much, especially in the New Testament, even in the Old Testament, there's a lot of references to, you know, all nations will hear and stuff like that. Well, what happens is that we have three monotheistic thrusts that are mostly opposing to each other, but I don't like the term Judeo-Christian. I just think it's funny when they use that term because the word Judeo isn't used very often. But really the Old and New Testament, there's so much synergy between that. And there's so much, for lack of a better term, enabling a lot of things that Israel does that liberals don't agree with. But, you know, pray for the peace of Israel, and if you bless Israel, God will bless you, kind of a thing. And so that's not super crazy though, but it is really weird to think you have a biblical mandate to support a particular country. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of anti-Semitic stuff. There have been people claiming to be Christians that are anti-Semitic, which is really crazy because, I mean, it's like most of their Bible is Jewish. And I love Jews. I am part Jewish myself. And I had a lot of exposure to the Jewish faith growing up. In fact, more than Christianity. It was kind of cool, you know, and I still think it's really cool. And I'm also not afraid to speak out about that there was a lot of harm with that, as well as there's a lot of elitism, of course. And it's interesting how folks do have this sort of inherited idea that we're better at doing certain things, and then they end up being better at certain things. And I find that really interesting. But anyways, what I'm saying about that is that, yeah, there are three main monotheistic thrusts when it comes to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It seems like each one are sort of trying to be an improvement on the next, you know, like, well, Jesus fulfilled the law. He was an improvement on the law. And we have three gods now, but they're one God in three persons. And so 1 + 1 + 1 = 1, which I know that not only from math, but from John Lennon. He says 1 and 1 and 1 is 3 in Come Together on Abbey Road, 1969. But anyways, it's a mathematical impossibility. And then you had another group of folks who were trying to improve on this Trinity thing, which, you know, they saw that as a form of polytheism. So that's where we get the Mohammedans, which is Islam, which is, you know, it means submission and stuff. And so it's interesting, though, when it comes to these kind of evil twin brothers, you know, and literally it came from twin brothers when you got Jacob and Esau, and then you had another couple of twins, too, when it came to Isaac and Ishmael. Ooh, I think I got them mixed up. But anyways, there were two groups of brothers in the Old Testament. I don't know why I'm getting my facts wrong, because I studied them so much. But anyways, we're having this big family dispute that's been going on for thousands of years. And really they're representing the same principle, is that there's this big boss who comes in and says all these little gods are not real and they're evil, and you have to submit to this one, and you have no choice. And if you don't, then we're going to start forcing people to do this, and we're going to do whatever means is necessary. And Christians love to say, oh, well, that's what Muslims do. But really, we do that as well. And here's an example I want to give about and I hate this because in America, there is a trend, a deplorable, horrible trend of men that commit a mass murder suicide. And of course, no Christian in their right mind is ever going to think that, oh, committing a mass murder suicide, well, God could ever be involved in something like that. That's a Muslim thing because, you get these, terrorist bombers, they go into a bank or something and they're wearing bombs and they kill themselves and they think they're going to go to heaven because of that. And Christians love to point the finger and say, those are terrorists, that's evil, and blah, 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 and stuff like that. And then we go and we teach a Sunday school thing about Samson, and it's really creepy if you know how Samson died. I mean, here they poked his eyes out and he was a slave for a while and all this stuff. And it had to do with his problem with who he fucked and a really bad haircut that went really bad. And so, anyways, Samson was like, I can't remember the details. I haven't read it for years, but he's like messing with these pillars of this big, I think it was with the Philistines or something like that. And he demolishes this huge building and he kills like all these people. And it's like, his mass murder suicide was seen as something quite admirable. And I didn't realize this until I was older, and I actually did a Google search for Samson destroying the Philistine edifice and all this stuff, and it was like a children's drawing of this blind guy, and he's taking these pillars down because of his strength that returned, and it all comes crumbling down and stuff. So we're teaching our children this, and then we go and we say, well, these mass murder suicides, well, that's a Muslim thing and they're evil because they wear turbans and they got dark eyes and stuff like that. But it really is just an old family dispute of a very similar underlying principle that there is a person who has a lot of human characteristics that calls himself the creator of the universe and who has a rule book, and everybody has to submit to that, and you either submit or you don't, and there's just this, you're either with us or against us, and it's this very black and white sort of dichotomy. And I've talked to Muslims, and I find them just as admirable as Christians. They're wonderful. They're strong and vibrant people, and they really feel like they have a purpose and a very tight-knit community. And for the most part, especially the Muslim men I talk to, are very similar to a lot of Bible preachers too. The kind of strength of character that they have, and the kind of confidence that they have. Now, mind you, I think a lot of that confidence comes from taking something into them and identifying with something really big. And so, what's so sad is that they hate things about Islam and vice versa, that in different ways they demonstrate the same problems. And so it really is another form of crazy to basically say, oh, well, we're not like them, they're the evil ones, we're the good guys. And this whole thing about this impending holy war. And sometimes I just wonder if, and this is a horrible idea, but most wars start with a battle of ideologies, and most of these ideologies have a religious foundation to it. And these conflicts are going on. It's like we're staining the ground with all of these entities of rage and terror and abuse and terrorizing families and children. They grow up with this, and they have this idea that the world is against them, and both sides are very similar. And then what would happen if we were to infiltrate the Islamic community with a bunch of phony prophets and have them like say, we're going to have this holy war and it's going to be in this spot here at this time and day. And then you have these false prophets that infiltrate Christianity. And believe me, it is so easy to infiltrate these people, because if you demonstrate power and you gain their confidence and you get folks to basically follow you, you can really infiltrate them from the outside. And there's not a lot of fact-checking that goes on in a lot of religious circles, especially if somebody comes along and they just captivate you with a lot of experiences, with a lot of good explanations, and giving you, meeting your needs in a lot of ways as well. And so here's something that I find very similar between this, I'm just calling him the Jehovah thing and the Allah thing, is that if you were to look at all the negative aspects of the history of these deities and how they deal with people, and you were to just pretend that, okay, they're not gods. Let's just say they're people. Let's say these are men. There's a man named Jehovah. Hi, I'm Jehovah, and I have a background. I say I love people. I do a lot of good stuff for people, but then again, if people don't submit and obey to me, obey me, then it's okay to kill them. It's okay to have, genocide and stuff like that, or the ground swallowing people up and stuff like that. Or, somebody picks up a stick on the wrong day, I can smite them and kill them, and, bolt of lightning kind of a thing. And that's always the big argument against monotheism, especially the Christian faith, is like, why do I want to serve a mean God? Well, the only way you'd want to serve a mean God is if you feel like you have to. And I really haven't studied a lot of Islam. I just hear a lot of stuff secondhand, so I'm not really an expert. It's just that what I hear sounds very similar to them. And this Allah thing, and I hate to call it that, because it really could just be like if brains were like hardware, and you get this sort of malware that's taking over your computer, and it's draining the resources, and then that information is passed on from generation to generation to generation. It could just be that it's a man-made concept that has taken a life of its own, and it starts talking. I had a creepy experience when I wrote this really big novel. I haven't edited it. I mean, it's just a piece of crap. But I found that it was like some of the characters in my book started having a mind of their own, and I started realizing, hey, did I create these characters? Am I channeling something? And it seems like they wanted to do certain things, and they were like trying to tell my story, and it was really weird. And so either, there can be man-made stuff that takes a life on its own if we give enough energy to that. We keep thinking about it, and it becomes like a program that, like a lot of sci-fi movies, when somebody creates an artificial intelligence, and that artificial intelligence starts to say, hey, I'm a thing of my own, and I'm going to start influencing you. You created me, but I'm going to start influencing you. Or it could be something from another world that's tampering, and that's trying to drain the energy, the life force of humanity, because we are very resourceful when it comes to how other dimensions might see us. And that's kind of some spooky spiritual stuff too. But again, that's me trying to explain what happened to me for 20 years of my life and why it was so real. And then when I leave that and I think, wow, that was so real, and it wanted to kill me, and it wanted to take me into doing other stuff. And I started realizing this when I came out of the closet as gay, and that was very much against this Jehovah thing, and this Allah thing is very much like, we want people to basically emphasize majority groups and privileged groups. If you're privileged, then we're going to give you power. If you're a minority group, like especially a sexual minority or something like that, then we're going to have to change you or kill you or exclude you or whatever it is. And that's part of this mentality of this monotheistic thing that I'm talking about. And the character attributes to that is very similar to somebody who has a narcissistic personality disorder. So those people are, and I've spent enough time around narcissists to know that those folks are often very prejudiced and very judgmental, especially to underprivileged people. And it's very similar to a bully type thing. A bully goes into a school and is looking for the weak to overpower the weak and preying off of the weak. And so what I noticed is that when I came out of the closet as gay, I still pretty much had my biblical worldview. It was a little bit different because I had to reinterpret all the scriptures. There was a half a dozen or so, especially in the New Testament is what I focused on. What we call the clobber passages, like 2 Corinthians 6:9 and Romans 1:21 and a lot of this stuff, trying to get people to think that any kind of sexual minority behavior is wrong. And so I'm speaking out about my conversion therapy experience, going to a straight camp. And I had an experience, and I called it counterintuitive because I was really sensitive to my intuition during my Christian experience. We called it being spirit-led. And the weird thing about being spirit-led is everything you were led to do had to, what they call, line up with the Word. Not the words of God. They call it the Word of God because the Bible calls itself the Word of God. They didn't manage to pluralize it, which is another kind of goofy biblical language that people use. But anyways, if what you're being spiritually directed to do with your intuition or whatever, if you question it, it has to agree with biblical principles, especially when it comes to your particular theological thrust in your group. And I realized after a while that my intuition and my conscience and my thinking, a lot of things were from an external source. And it made me think that everything of myself was, so it was like this big switch. Everything that who I was, my sexuality, my needs, all this kind of stuff, I like put it aside and I said, that's not me, that's the flesh, that's the ways of the world. And then I over-identified with something that I brought into me that I convinced myself that that's me. I'm this Jesus-inhabited person, but really it wasn't a relationship with Jesus as much it was a relationship with submitting to a person who had a lot of human characteristics who I couldn't see, but I knew what he wanted, I knew what he liked, and my intuition was based on that. So I'd have what they call these unctions and things like, oh, I feel led to do this, and someone says, hey, I feel led to do that too. Well, that must be God, because, well, the thing is that they're all in this sort of this software, that they're on a computer network type thing where they agree with each other. And there's been times when, for instance, we'd come up with a song list for the worship, and it would have one theme. And then the pastor would be praying in a house on the other side of town, and he would come up with a sermon that was the same theme as the worship. And that happened quite often, and there was a synergy. And of course, we always thought, well, that must be God, because, you know, it happens so often that it couldn't be a coincidence. Well, the thing is, just because people come to the same conclusion can be explained by a lot of psychic phenomenon too. And it could be the influence of entities, and it could be the influence of it really doesn't have a lot of psychological explanation when you have a lot of coincidences like that, except for the fact that we could attribute higher meaning to certain things that we isolate and we notice, and that's another kind of form of crazy, when people put heightened meaning to things when there are coincidences. But anyways, I'm going to go on about, I've got a list to cover of some stuff I thought about. And I'm going to go on with some more fun stuff when it comes to Christianity and insanity.